Pine Street Inn's joining with a partner to develop what could be the city's largest complex of supportive housing for the homeless. Proposed for the current site of Pine Street's offices in Jamaica Plain, the project follows growing recognition for the need to solve homelessness with permanent housing. To explain the project are the Pine Street Inn's president and executive director, Lyndie Downie, and a principal with Rode Architects, Eric Robinson. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
First, I want to start with Lyndie Downie. Talk about what does permanent housing mean? What does it do for people?
Well, it changes everything if you're homeless. It gives you a place to rest your head every night, gives you a permanent address. It gives you a place where the stability of your life can start.
Right. Eric, what about your role here? Because this is a location, it is near the orange line. You got to think of, I guess, the street. You got to think of the residents who are going to live there. So what are you factoring in?
So I think for us, we're, as you know, we do work all over the city and all the neighborhoods. And this is, we don't see this project really any differently than we see all of our other projects. And we want to take it through sort of our rigorous design process that we think sets up the project for success within the city as it relates to both its abutters and its neighborhood context, as well as the city and sort of the BPDA and dealing with the approvals process. So for us, we're just excited to be a part of the team with the community builders and the Pine Street Inn folks. But we really feel like we're just leading them through the process of getting the building approved. But we want the building to be obviously doing its job from programmatic sort of residential sort of housing, but we want it to be a good civic neighbor within the Washington Street corridor and all the sort of aspects of that sort of come along with it. So.
Lyndie, this is, as these things go, it's big, as much as 6 stories possibly, and you're going to have a mix of units. This is not just exclusively supportive housing for the homeless.
No, 140 units for people who were formerly homeless, and those are really small micro units, I would call, that Rode is designing for us with their own bathroom, very small kitchenette, I would call it, enough room for a bed, small kitchen table, a dresser, common space on the ground floor, and then the rest of the units will be 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms for single people or families. The affordability on the units that Pine Street will run will be very, very low income, 30% of median income and below, and the rest of the units will be 60 and 80% of median income.
What about the supports within the building? Because you're still going to have some kind of administrative presence there, right?
So Pine Street right now has 40 buildings throughout Boston and Brookline where we actually provide supportive housing for people who have been homeless a long time, who also have a disability. And those houses are staffed sometimes 24/7, sometimes with a case manager during the day, really depending on the need and where people are. This building in particular will be staffed 24/7. We will have security. It's our largest project today. The next largest right now is 52 units. And we are now an agency that has more supportive housing units and shelter beds. So really much of what we've been doing from a mission standpoint for the past 7-8 years has been supportive housing. And we know supportive housing for people who are homeless a long time and have a disability. We know it ends their homelessness. Our retention rate last year in our housing was 91%. That means everybody who moved in a year ago, 91% of them are still with us.
Eric, I imagine one thing you might be hearing from the neighborhoods is that we were glad to get rid of the L back in the late 1980s, but we don't want the street to be too crowded with tall buildings. What are you going to do about that?
So we are working closely with both the J.P. Rocks sort of planning study, which really takes a special look, I think, at the sort of issues associated with Washington Street and some of the bigger corridors in JP to set up a framework for providing wider sidewalks, setting the building back up at upper levels to sort of alleviate some of that sort of density along the street. So that's really the framework that we're working within. And just where we are located in the site we're in, the building program actually works pretty well and is very consistent with what the J.P. Rocks folks were trying to put across from the standpoint of a new building on Washington Street. So we're really excited that we can not push against zoning and push against the neighborhood, but work with them in a collaborative way to show them how we are actually incorporating the design and using their framework to create a great building for the street.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Lyndie Downie of Pine Street Inn and Eric Robinson of Rode Architects. Lyndie, not too long ago, I read about that prolonged legal battle in the South End when you opened up a much smaller supportive housing development in some of the old brownstones. People in that neighborhood, they're really worried about how that was going to work out. I mean, how has it worked out?
Well, I would say Upton Street's worked out quite well. We have 2 buildings there. We sold a third. And we have formerly homeless people living in both those buildings. We have a live-in staff person as well as some other staff there. And I think the neighborhood, we are on in a good place. Having said that, things happen and we address them as very best we can. But I think things have changed in the neighborhood. I think there's a recognition now that, especially for people who are chronically homeless, long-time homeless, that housing solves so many other issues. It solves people's homelessness. It gives people, as I said, a stable place to start. It saves a lot of money on health care because people stop ending up in the ER. They don't end up inpatient as often once they have a stable place to live. So I think there's been a recognition from a policy standpoint that supportive housing really does work. I think in Boston, where we are dense and expensive, getting to scale has been a challenge. Upton Street was quite a small project. This is, 5 times the size of Upton Street, in a much bigger site and a much busier street, granted, in a bit of a different, obviously a different neighborhood. But I will say we have been very grateful and encouraged by the response we've gotten from the neighbors in Jamaica Plain. It's early days yet. We're still working on design, as Eric said. There's still, I think, some back and forth with the neighbors and got some work to do still, but we've been really grateful that people have recognized supportive housing as a solution to homelessness, and grateful that to be talking to people both about the units, the design, and how to support the tenants once they move in.
Eric, you mentioned you were talking to some of the activists who are so concerned about the displacement problems in the JP Rocks area. Does this project help those concerns in some way, you think?
Lyndie might be able to speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the one part about that's exciting for us is, we do a lot of sort of market rate development. And, working in the neighborhoods, we do hear a lot about displacement, sort of the impact of even on a project that's maybe currently an abandoned site or something that's not going to directly displace people, but sort of the ripple effect associated with that. So for our standpoint, we are in the neighborhoods and we hear a lot about, the IDP requirements associated with the city are just too low. And I'm certainly sort of believe that might be the case. And, it's a challenge in all the neighborhoods. So I think to kind of come in with a team that is proposing a fully affordable building, it's a little bit of a release in terms of sort of not having to worry about that aspect of it. We have all the other things to worry about in terms of building in the city and the complications associated with ledge and all the sort of typical things. But that has been taken off the table, and it's been a very good discussion in the neighborhoods. Again, I agree with Lyndie. We're not done, but we have to sort of figure it out. But
I think the displacement issue is real.
Yep.
The very direct displacement, someone coming in and converting a building that might be a 3-family to condominiums. People have lived there for 10, 15 years and they have to leave. I think the other thing that's very real is rents going up on a regular basis. And while no one's asked to leave, if your rent goes up $200 a month and your salary doesn't or your benefits don't, you're going to have to leave because you won't be able to pay the rent. And so we're seeing both. And there's no question displacement is real and it's happening every day in this kind of a market. I think the city's trying very hard to intervene when they know that displacement's happening and when they're aware of it. I think the city's trying to step in wherever they can. What I would say, when I first came to Pine Street 30 years ago, on a regular basis we found rooms for people. People that were with us for a few months, a few weeks even. We could actually find you a room, believe it or not, in Boston, in one of the neighborhoods. That housing stock, those small units, rooms, kind of very small studios, there's very little of that being built. We need to build more of it so that we can relieve the pressure on the displacement side as well. And I think this is a starting point, but we're not done.
Eric, you also have to not add to pressure on parking. This is a great location near Green Street Station, but so what's the right way to do this?
Well, we're working on that.
Yes,
I mean,
we are.
it's, there will be, Pine Street will have their administrative offices there as well. So we'll have some residential parking, and the administrative office. So, you know, I think figuring out what the right support is in terms of the parking and the deliveries and sort of that aspect of it is crucial to it. And we're in the process of that. We are, you know, we're providing the sort of bike storage and the things that also sort of support it. So I think it's not a singular sort of approach. We have to sort of figure out different ways to sort of manage it on all aspects. And I think, you know, using the Pine Street vans and whatever sort of the different aspects of moving people around, it's something that we're considering and trying to figure out how do we bake it into the project right now. So
Thank you both very much for being with us, Eric Robinson and Lyndie Downie. In a moment, a new report on the needs of LGBTQ youth in Massachusetts.